our Donkey Kong Country 3 retrospective. So this is a part of a series. So we've already done Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest, and now we're on to Donkey Kong Country 3. So this is all aligned to when the games are available on Nintendo Switch Online, so the SNES offering. So you can play all these games if you have a Switch and a Nintendo Switch Online service. So, Swinny, how do you want to break this all up? Because Mike hasn't played this game, and he is now going to play, I believe, the messenger on the video. If people are following along on the video,
Well, first of all, just wanted to just say that look, this game came out in 1996, November 1996, so really late in the SNES lifetime. The 64 was already out, and later got a port to the Game Boy Advance in 2005, but it's very different. Like they changed a lot of things. You know, the overworld map is very different. There's different mini games. Just so I think of it as a different game. But I followed the Wikipedia format and said that it is available on SNES, Game Boy Advance, and as we said, the Switch Online. So developed by Rare, published by Nintendo. So I've got
and just quickly, like the game. So we're not covering the Game Boy Advance version.
no, definitely not.
We should say though, the Game Boy Advance version has a lot. Like out of all the Game Boy Advance, so don't confuse it with Donkey Kong Land, where Donkey Kong Land are like another separate game trilogy on the Game Boy. The Game Boy Advance games took the SNES games, but they actually did modify them a bit. And Donkey Kong Country 3 was a lot, and they introduced a whole new world.
And that's why
So we didn't play any of that.
That's why the fact that Wikipedia has them listed on the same page, I think, is a misnomer. Like I think it's such a different version of the game. If anything, Donkey Kong Land 3, which I'm very familiar with, I played through a game, completed all the time trials, is actually almost closer in some ways. So it's, but Donkey Kong Country 3, so we've mentioned it before when we talked about Donkey Kong Country 1 and Donkey Kong Country 2. This is, upfront, is easily my favorite in the series. It always has been since, I first played number 3. But we know that for a lot of people, number 2 is the classic, is the one that's like, okay, this is the epitome of the Donkey Kong Country series. So it's going to be interesting to get your take on it for someone that didn't really play through it all completely back in the day.
Yeah, and I played it, I think maybe your house, but I played a little bit of it, but I never really played through it back in the day. And then, through the years, booted it up, played it a bit, but never had the obligation, quote unquote, but I do feel obligated. Never had the obligation to play through the whole thing. And I'm so glad that we did this. Like, we had to play through this whole trilogy. So I've obviously owned DKC2, love that game so much. Still think it's one of the best games on the SNES. And having played this game and then also the first one, which I think I'd played through the first one a bit, but I didn't really like it that much. It was really, really interesting. And, maybe we'll loop back at the end of our final thoughts on the whole trilogy before we move on to the Wii and the Wii U games.
Yeah, and just starting with, I've got my notes here that to me, so this game, you've got Dixie Kong and you've got Kiddy Kong. So while Kiddy Kong is kind of similar to Donkey Kong in some ways, there's cool new mechanics and just something about the controls in this game just feel just so super tight and precise for me. It just feels super smooth. Like the move from Donkey Kong Country 1 to Donkey Kong Country 2 was just huge, right? They went from
that was the biggest.
Yeah, like easily. Like they went from janky hitboxes and
and controls
to this really great smooth experience. And I just think that they've just and it makes sense. It's the third in the series. They iterated and just to me just smoothed out some of those remaining rough edges, and it just, to me, this game plays like a dream, with the exception of my most hated level in the game, which is, I think it's Tearaway Toboggan. That still has
you didn't like that either. Yeah.
No, because to me that still has a wonky hitbox. It's like the biggest thing when we're talking about hitboxes. That's the biggest thing that I found in the game, and I always thought that like you would land on an enemy and just with the back of the toboggan, if you're on a slight angle, it would hit you, and it's like that doesn't feel fair. That's very similar to Donkey Kong Country 1, where you'd hit one of the clap traps, and you're like, wait, I landed on that thing and it hurt me. But just to me, one of the things I didn't like in Donkey Kong Country 2 is that they used a lot of climbing sections where you're climbing vertical ropes, and a lot of that stuff didn't feel as smooth. We talked about it when we did that retrospective. Didn't feel as smooth as it should be, and they've kind of almost removed a lot of that stuff, and they've replaced it with a lots of hanging ropes. So you like hanging vertically from stuff, and it just feels great. So it's like they've said, well, we still want this different kind of traversal options, but we want to make it in a way where it doesn't feel like it's slowing people down. Like this is,
Mm.
I haven't watched any AGDQ runs or speed runs of this game, but this game feels like it would be great to speed run because it doesn't really slow you down very much.
And just on the controls, because I also, just following along with your format, I'd place the controls along with, just the mechanics of the characters.
Hmm.
For me, the controls, 100% in DKC1, the controls themselves are very slippery and not non-responsive. That's the wrong way to say it, but it just felt, especially with the hitboxes, that was probably the biggest problem with the game.
Hmm.
Very janky. I think that this game has superior controls to DKC2. I think it's very close. And I don't think it's one of those ones where it's, anything to do compared to DKC1 to DKC2. That was a monumental change in how tight the controls were. This was better. Like, I'd concede that. But for me, the mechanics of the characters themselves. So you got Dixie Kong again, obviously. But with Kiddy Kong versus Diddy Kong, I felt just the movement of the characters in DKC2, the mechanics themselves were just so much better.
So,
And it's more of a character thing for me.
well, yeah. So Kiddy Kong has, to me, the coolest mechanic in probably the entire series,
Oh yeah, what
which
was
is
that?
water skipping. So it's a
Oh, I
mechanic.
didn't even know what that was.
Exactly. It's a mechanic that they don't put in your face, but it's required to get some of the secrets.
Oh, okay.
So if you've noticed, a bunch of the levels have water where it's only going up to like a third of the screen,
Yeah.
or it will scroll down a bit. If you roll as Kiddy Kong onto the water and you time your button presses each time he hits the surface of the water, he bounces and he gets higher.
Ah.
So I'm not saying that it's something that to me it's cool and it's great and it's really good for speed runs and everything. But because it's not required in the game and they don't tell you about it, then it's understandable someone wouldn't realize it's there. But that's why I love Kiddy Kong so much, is because of that mechanic. Like otherwise, he's basically almost identical to Donkey Kong in some ways, with just, as I said, better controls and hitbox. I do, Diddy Kong's role and his movement is great, but the thing I really like is the two characters feel very different. Whereas I think with Donkey Kong Country 2, which I love, Diddy and Dixie, other than the propeller hair, like, which is great, obviously is very different. They're still very small, like the small characters. So I like having the
Hmm.
dynamic of this. It is a case where a lot of the levels you just want to play as Dixie Kong because it's just easier to get around. But
Yeah, I would always find myself starting with Kiddy Kong because, most people would know, but just for those that don't, with Donkey Kong Country, the whole mechanic, the life mechanic really is your character. And if they die, they're gone, but you have two characters if you've got your full complement. So essentially, you got two hits before you're dead. But they have different mechanics. So I would often pretty much start the level as Kitty, go as far as the way through, and then if I died, then I'd have Dixie, which is sort of, to me, the superior character because you've got like a storm mechanic with the propeller, which I think to me is the best mechanic in the game.
yeah, but to me, it just doesn't feel as cool as bouncing along the water. Like that just feels cool when you do it.
I
Like
didn't even know you could do
when
that. So,
if you do go back and try to get some more completion, I ended up getting about I think 88%. So I completed all
oh
the.
wow, yeah, you went
Well, I
pretty
played a
deep.
bit more. I got all the bonuses, and we'll talk about secrets a bit. But I got all the bonuses and secrets in the main game, and I was up to like doing stuff in the secret areas. But the the one thing I don't like about this game is, and I did get this a bit with Donkey Kong Country 2, but I felt it a lot more in this one, was the tag mechanic, which I think is hitting the select button
Select button, yeah,
or the minus button on the Switch. And clarify, yeah, I played the Switch Online version as well, which will be
yeah.
important for a note later for me. Is half the time it just doesn't seem to work. Like you have to be in such a specific situation, and I guess it's the positioning of the character so they can physically tag. But there's
Yes,
times when
correct.
I'm like, oh man, I just like need to keep repositioning himself just to swap the characters, and that to me there's no benefit to that at all. Like that should just be a
Yeah,
nice quick change, you know?
happened to me a few times at the start, and then I just realized, okay, I need pretty good clearance on both sides to be able to switch. But it does cause issues where there's some platforms you land on, you can't switch players really. Like
Yeah,
you have to really finesse it to be able to get it.
yeah.
So,
But the other thing um that I really love and I think is the best in the series is the difficulty. So
mm,
Donkey Kong Country 1 is really easy, and then it will throw just a couple of really tough levels right at the end at you. Donkey Kong Country 2 has spikes all throughout to me, where it's like some of the bosses are really tough, and you're like, oh, well, that
mm.
came out of nowhere. But as we talked about, like Donkey Kong Country 2, we consider as one of the best platform games of all time. So it's just in when we're talking about this, so it's not me harping on Donkey Kong Country 2. It's just like in a comparison sense. Whereas I
Yeah, and you're
felt,
just giving an honest perspective, right?
yeah,
Same
and
here.
then right at
So
the end there's a massive spike in difficulty. Whereas I
in
felt
DKC2 or
DKC 2 with Donkey Kong Country
okay.
3, to me, it's just really balanced, and it has a much gentler curve. And with the exception, there's a couple levels that you'll get stuck on, but they don't feel like, oh, well, that came out of nowhere, like super difficult levels for me. Now, I'm very familiar with this game. I haven't played it in a while, but I probably completed this game like 30 times back in the day because I used to
Mm,
like try to speed run it in my own kid swinny way. I think I ended up beating it like 2 hours once or something, right?
pretty decent.
Actually, I think I got it under 2 hours. I think the actual speed runners, people know what they're doing. It's like 46 minutes for any percent and
Mm.
stuff. But um, so I'm very familiar with the mechanics and stuff. But to me, there's nothing like that. It's just really nice and smooth. So I don't know how you felt though.
Yeah,
That's
so
where it's going to be
uh,
interesting.
and difficulty is a funny thing because sometimes games can be difficult because they just don't play well. And personally, I feel like that's where it was with DKC1, where some of it I just found really hard to do just because the game would be really cheap and there'd be things you just couldn't
Oh
see.
yeah,
And you
horrible
almost
cheap.
couldn't react to. Like even if you had really good reaction, I don't really think you could react to because you kind of needed to already jumped before you saw what the thing had happened, right? And it was also really cheap with the way that they placed the bananas, where it was like kind of leading you down the garden path, where it's like you shouldn't be going that way, and it's kind of screwed you. Good thing is like with DKC 2 and 3, I feel like most of that stuff has been eliminated. I definitely think that DKC 2 was harder overall, and I
Oh,
agree with
definitely,
your
definitely.
sentiment that this game was smoother as well. So it did get more difficult later. It was a lot easier earlier. I just felt that DKC 2 was harder. There was like harder stages, which I don't mind, but I never felt as much that there was a few levels in this where it was kind of a bit janky or
Any
just
specific
got really.
ones that you remember, or at least like the concepts?
It was like like it was all the stuff in the last world. So I think like one of them was the toboggan one that you mentioned as
Yeah.
well. I'm just going to bring up the level list.
There is one
It was just
specific level which is a low light of mine, which is I think easily the hardest level in the game, which is Lightning Lookout. So that's
oh,
a
I is that the one where the lightning comes down?
yeah. So the reason why I think that it's because this game introduces new mechanics that are only seen for one level throughout the whole game. So that's not a new thing, but this is such a specific mechanic that is so punishing that and it's I don't know if it's random or if it's obviously based on your like XY position in the level and everything, but it just feels really unfair. And I'm so used to that level now that it's like, okay, I know you jump across, then you jump back, and then you jump back again, like when you're going across barrels, for
Yeah.
instance. But I think that I could see that level being frustrating for a lot of people.
Yeah, that one wasn't too bad. I think it was only like a couple of times I tried it. And again, like a lot of these things could just be your playstyle.
Yeah,
Like I could imagine that the last level, Poisonous Pipeline, the one where it reverses your controls in the poison all the way
I
through,
love that level.
could be like really difficult for some people. But I think I got through it without dying. And I think that's just a like it either clicks or doesn't click with
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that was like with me, like the one that I got so annoyed, I was like gonna toss my controller was probably not too hard of a level, really, was the Coin Dozer's
Ah,
Clamber,
yes,
which
yes,
is,
yes,
you
yes.
know, the DK, coin guys. It was those type of guys, but they didn't, obviously weren't protecting DK coins. And it was just so janky to me. And I,
Yeah, I
like,
agree. I agree. I agree.
it's kind of maybe a little bit unfair saying it's janky because it's kind of like it is the intention of the mechanic. But what would happen is they would like have these like garbage bins that they would be holding onto, and if you're like you have to be right over the top of them to hold it above, and if you're like to the left or right of them, they would just push you off the platforms. But what I didn't like about it was there was almost like no way to recover from it when they started whacking you,
It's
and it
really
just felt
rough.
like so cheap and like really clunky. Like,
That's a level where Dixie was just like, okay, I'm going to use Dixie for this whole time, so you can come down slower on top of them
yes,
to make sure that they've
yes,
got it exactly up. Yeah, I really like the concept of that level, but it's almost like I wish they would have done that, but put less pitfalls, so that it's like, okay, they knocked me down, but it doesn't mean instant death. because
yeah.
because unlike other levels where you'll get hit and you still have a chance because you've got another character, this is like you got two characters or not, doesn't matter. You're straight in the pit most of the time. So
Yeah, so that really, really annoyed me. Like that level, and I think it is because I was trying to play it with Kiddy Kong all the way through. Like, and as I said, I always started the levels with Kiddy Kong because I also felt like it was a bit more of a challenge to do that. And then by the end of it, I was getting really annoyed, and I'm like, you know what, stuff it. I'm just gonna cheese this and beat Dixie Kong and hover over them, and
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
it became a really boring level because of that. Because what you'd have to do for me anyway, the strat was, you know, as soon as you land on the platform, try to jump up straight away and then hover so they come right underneath you. And if you do that, it's kind of like safe. Like it's kind of like actually hard to die at that point.
So
It's just like it was boring to me.
I guess like we're talking about levels, so I'll just talk about so my standout levels. It's weird. Some of these might not be for everyone, but I love the Riverside Race level, and so that's where you're racing against a timer. And if you beat the timer under a
Oh
certain
yeah,
amount of time, it then unlocks a secret in the overworld. And we'll get to those in a second. But
yeah, that was cool. I like
but
that.
that's
I played that a couple of times to get a good time on that.
but that level is really cool because that's where using the water skipping is really really neat to get all the secrets in it
Oh
because
yeah,
it's
I never
built
thought
it's
about that.
built
Yeah.
around that. I love the demolition drain pipe level. So to me, that's their best like minecart style level. But instead, you've got I guess it is like a toboggan or a sled, but you can hook onto the roof onto a rail as well as fall on the rail
Yeah.
on the bottom. And I also really like the idea of moving between them. And I that level it was also great because I wasn't playing it on in the Donkey Kong Land 3 version because that level's so tough. All those levels were so tough in Donkey Kong Land 3 because just imagine playing that on Game Boy. Um,
Yeah. It's pretty rough even on the SNES to be frank.
yeah, I really love the Rips or Rage levels. So that's where you've got the giants, and this is it's a stressful level, but you've got a giant saw going up the tree, and you're within the tree trunks, and I just love the concept of it. It's a way to do an auto scroll that also gives you a sense of like I need to rush ahead, otherwise the saw's going to reach me before I can jump up the branches. Um, Another level I love just because the concept's so cool is Crackshot Croc. So that's where you've got a fourth wall. It's in the factory levels, and you've got the fourth wall breaking sniper that's aiming on the screen,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and you're
yeah. That's
going
cool.
through most of the level as the spider. So combining the cool spider mechanics with this sniper, and then there's a bonus level that gives you control of the sniper, which is just like that's the only time in the game it does it, and it's just like just to do that for a bonus level is really really neat. Um, I love any of the cliff levels are my favorites because they're just like super fast paced platforming. As I said, I love the controls when you're hanging on the ropes, like the horizontal ropes, and those levels are all about those ropes. And probably the last one, because I've mentioned a lot, is Fish Food Frenzy. That's where you've got
uh,
a fish.
so that was going to be my pick that I was going to
Yeah,
say
so
that.
so you got a fish tailing you, and you need to feed it certain enemies, but not other certain enemies. Otherwise, it'll get pissed off and attack you. It's such a cool concept. It's a great gimmick.
So and that's one thing I do want to say, and I'll reserve one thing that I want to say, but I'll link it back to this that like when we get to bosses, but the levels and this level, it has a lot of fun mechanics. A very Nintendo thing of here's a cool mechanic and you'll never see it again,
Yeah.
right? And it was like this level, and I tried to as much as possible. I must admit, I may have only looked up one or two things in this whole game, but I tried to keep it to the authentic what we were doing in the 90s. You didn't really know. You couldn't just Google something really quickly to find it, right? So, playing this level, I didn't get the mechanic at the start. I was like, what the hell's going on? Like, how do I have to outrace this? So I was trying to go as fast as I could. It wasn't working. And then I'm like, I look at the title because they are pretty good with this kind of stuff, rare. And my Fish Food Frenzy, I'm like, okay, well, I tried to figure out a way to, what's going on here? And then I saw it eat one of them. I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. And it's like, yeah, you got to feed it the right type of food by getting close to certain enemies, but not
And there's only
others.
two types of enemies, really. Like, so
Yeah.
once you understand that mechanic, it's like, okay, don't make it, prevent it from eating the spiky ones. It can eat the, like, other fish, you know.
Yeah, and I really love that. Like I love that level. Once I figured that out, I was like, oh, that's cool. Like how they've done that, and I kind of echo your sentiment that the auto scroller, they've done that really really well in this game. Like they're like, how can you do a new spin on these auto scrollers? And they've done it through all these mechanisms where, I look back and think about it from a game development point of view, but as a player, you're just playing it, and it feels very authentic in the game world itself, and very
And
cool.
even that Ripsaw level, like, you'll have a case where you hit an invincibility barrel and suddenly you can go on the saw and it becomes part of the bonus areas and things. It's just really,
Mm.
really neat. And as I said, like the low lights to me, yeah, like that tearaway toboggan level because of the janky hitbox and that lightning lookout. They're probably, and this, it's hard for me to find stuff I don't like in this game. One thing I will say is that the first world and the first part of the game definitely isn't as strong as Donkey Kong Country 2. Like the early levels just aren't as fun and interesting, but to me it really picks
Mm.
up. And that's where the middle part of Donkey Kong Country 2 for me, when you're in like the lava areas and stuff, is where I'm least interested when I'm playing that game. Whereas this game, after that first part, I'm just super into it. And it's non-linear in the sense that there's a couple of points where you can play different worlds simultaneously, like choose which ones you want to do. So
Yeah, so like for me, I had only ever really played through the first world of this game ever over the course of the last, 20 years since it's been out. And I totally agree with that idea that this game kind of does itself a little bit of a disservice by how it starts.
hmm.
Because if I'd sort of known the mid game, late game, I definitely would have played through this. But I'd only really played through the start, and I'm like, it's kind of a bit flat. Like flat to me probably represents it best. It's just kind of like it's not terrible, but it's just like, it's
Yeah,
it's nothing
it
exceptional
looks
for me.
nice, but I mean it's really easy, like as you'd expect. But it's at least with Donkey
Yeah,
Kong Country 1, the first levels were a bit flat, but they were cool and they had great music. Like
was
we'll get to the
first time you ever
music,
saw something
yeah,
like that as
and we'll get
well.
to the
Like that was a
music as
critical
well.
thing,
But
right?
like the settings do matter, and I do like the like. It's like a saw, like a wood mill setting. I like the look of it, but it's not the most like engaging thing. And to me, they really pick up on that stuff later and just start
Mm,
throwing really cool stuff at you. So,
yeah.
but just
And then the overworld, which
yeah,
like to me was the biggest standout feature of this
oh,
game
this.
compared to DKC2.
So, for anyone that's never played Donkey Kong Country 3 but played the other games, those games you essentially just move between set paths between the levels.
Mm,
There's a couple of times in the games where you can choose one or the other. Usually, it's you can choose like a bonus Swankies games or something. But in this game, you still move between paths in some areas, but when you're in the overworld area before you go into each world, you're riding around on jet skis, you're going on a hovercraft, you're opening secret caves. And like there's I can't think like very few games had done anything like this when this happened,
mm.
or at least on that generation. So when you start hitting PlayStation 64, then that stuff starts happening a lot more. But and you've got a tiny DK sprite, or sorry, a tiny like Dixie sprite or whatever, and it's kind of similar to
Yeah,
Chrono.
DK, Dixie Kong.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of like almost like Chrono Trigger a bit. How you got this tiny sprite and a nice, cool overworld.
But it's even more than that. Like, and I think you're right. You know, this is going to be stretching the point way too far, but it was almost like a pseudo open world once you got past a certain bit.
Yeah,
because I actually played through a later world from a how they number them, and I didn't realize that, and I thought I was further in the game, and then when I was going through, I'm like, what the hell? Like I feel like I haven't even got up to world 5 or 6 or whatever it was. And then, yeah, I realized that you could kind of pick which world you wanted to go to at some point. So,
Yeah, and just there's so many secrets. I won't get into it because the game just got re-released on Nintendo Switch Online, so there's a lot of people that are playing for the first time. But just like Donkey Kong Country 2, there's secret levels. But in this game, there's banana birds to collect. There's like hidden caves that have like music mini games that would then tie into that. There's there's and This is not my definitely not my favorite thing in the game or anything by far, but there's trading items between the different NPCs, which are these
mm,
bears. It's pretty straightforward, but unless you know what to do, it can be a bit of a running around. So once you know who needs what item, then it's fine. But it'd be like, oh, I got this. So I need to go back to remember which random bear had asked for this mirror, for instance. But it does lead to some cool stuff. And the actual bonus levels in the game, when you hit the bonus barrels within the levels themselves, they're probably my favorite in the series as well. Specifically, the when you have to collect the green banana that will cycle from different positions around.
oh yeah, yeah,
Um, and a number Donkey Kong Country 2 had a lot of great bonus levels as well. I just think that mechanic was just my favorite. And things like even the snowball fights, like you have to fight a boss like that, but there's also mini games where you're throwing at a target. Just feels once you get used to the controls, just feels nice and smooth. But one thing I do prefer the Donkey Kong Country 2 over this one is how they handle the DK coins. So it gets better, but in the first probably half of the game, to get the DK coin in each level, you have to find the coin guard, the guy that's
yeah.
got the DK coin on his as a shield, and you have to hit him from behind with generally like a metal barrel, and it's neat. And I see what they're going for, but it definitely didn't feel as special to randomly just see him there as opposed to finding the secret in Donkey Kong Country 2, where you're like, oh man, I found this cool. This is where the DK coin was. You generally don't see it. In this one, it's like, oh,
Yeah,
now I need to
correct.
go hunt down where the barrel is. They do some cool stuff with it, but a lot of it's just like, okay, I'll just walk right, grab the barrel, and go left and hit it against the wall.
Yeah, I almost go further than what you're saying. Like, because I didn't do as much of a completion of this game as I did in DKC 2. And with this game, I felt it was almost like that part of it. So I think overall, the secrets, the overworld, the whole package to me is better than DKC 2 from a secrets perspective and sort of, new game plus, quote unquote, type of thing. But the DK coins felt really dialed in almost. Oh, sorry, not dialed in. Kind of phoned in.
Hmm.
It was a bit like, oh, okay, really? Like it felt like half the time it was just right at the end, and you looked at it and it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I got to go back and grab a barrel to be able to get that. It just kind of felt boring,
I
like compared to DKC 2, where you might go off the beaten track a little bit, and then you see the DK coin guy, and you're like, ah, cool, I found where he is.
I think I know. I have a hunch why they made it a bit more obvious.
Mm.
It's because the thing that it leads to, which I won't spoil, is is much cooler, I think, than Donkey Kong
Ah,
Country
okay,
2. So I think they wanted more people to see
to do it,
that.
yeah.
You do need to access. It's weird. It's like a domino effect. You do need to access the secret areas, which require something else to be able to get all the DK
Mm.
coins because you have to get them from every level. But still, I think that they really wanted people to see what this leads to because it leads to some really crazy stuff. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, I think that's why. But 100%, like the DK coin, like that was one of the most brilliant ideas that they added. In number two was these DK coins that made it feel awesome when you found it, and some
Yeah.
of those are really tough to find. But yeah, the overworld is great. It's not perfect. It's a little janky to try and sometimes get your little sprite onto the right thing to get off the
Mm.
vehicle. But overall, I mean, for this was Super Nintendo. Games didn't do
Oh,
this
it's
stuff.
so crazy.
Um,
Yeah.
when it comes to bosses, so I actually really love the bosses in this game, but more from a mechanical standpoint. So, with the exception of one boss, I just like the way these ones play out. but I'm not as much of a fan of the boss designs themselves. There are a couple bosses, or at least one boss, like I think it's the sword boss in number 2, I forget its name, that I really didn't like the look of. But there's a couple in this one that as well. It's like, but I like the way they play. The one that I've never been a fan of, because it's awkward, is the chaos fight. So that's when you got the robot that you need to jump on these like spinning platforms that come out of it, and then you hit
Yeah.
it on the head. I'm again, like, it'd been a while since I played, but was so used to playing that fight that it's. But I remember back in the day, I was like, oh man, half the time you like bounce off the top, and it just feels like a bit of a drag if you keep missing the platforms to get up to hit him. So
Yeah, that one was really annoying because you do it a few times and you have to realize you can't get too close
yeah,
to the actual boss,
and
or
they
else it would just bounce you back. And it's a bit like kind of why, like, I didn't really understand why they built it that
what's
way because that was a conscious choice.
frustrating because they essentially give you 3 chances, or you think you got 3 chances to jump on the platform, but the second time it knocks you out for punching gloves, so you get knocked off, and the third time, by the time you get up to the top, his head's probably retracted back into the robot. So it's like
Yeah,
you pretty
correct.
much got to
Yeah.
do it the first time, and by that you've got to by that if you miss it, then you just got to go through the cycle again.
Yeah, it's really annoying. Like the bosses in this, it's really hard for me to judge it because I think the boss fights. I actually find it really hard to judge. The boss fights overall in this kind of feel like they should be better, but the designs of them are so weird and
Hmm.
not fitting the game to a point where it felt like they'd outsourced half the bosses and just gave someone a rough idea of what they were and what they were going to look
I
like.
do like the waterfall boss. That's probably my favorite.
Oh, it looks horrible though. It doesn't look like a donkey. It doesn't look like it fits the game. It's like really odd.
No, but no, I'm talking more like I like because I love
The fight.
I like the fight, but I also
Yeah, I like the fight
I
as
love
well.
the look of the waterfall levels in general. So the fact that they made a boss that was half outside the waterfall, I actually really like that. But the just in general, like the thing as well is that the K rule fight is easily the weakest of the series, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
it's crap.
But the other version you can play, which I won't spoil, is way better.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe I'll get a save state or something. Trying
yeah.
to get to
So,
that
or you can
point.
just watch a clip of it. Like, there's a lot more to do.
Ah, okay,
But
cool.
it's like especially the first phase of it is just like, like it feels like you know what to do, but you don't know exactly what the game's wanting you to, like, how to execute it. It's like, well, I've got to hit him, but it's just really
Yeah, I
awkward.
know.
So, and
Yeah, and also I think maybe it's a bit of a reaction because I do think Donkey Kong Country 2 K Rule and that is too difficult compared to the rest of the game and how the game played out. I know that you beat it on like your second go, but you're a legend.
I did beat this
Um,
one on my first go, that's for sure.
yeah, I just felt like it was a bit too difficult for compared to the rest of the game, Donkey Kong Country 2. Whereas this felt too easy
Too
and
easy
maybe a bit
once you
of an
figured out that
overreaction.
first phase. Like, that's the annoying part to me. It's
Yeah,
like, oh, okay, so you can just duck here. It's, oh, okay, well then that
yeah.
changes everything.
I
Um,
find that boss is really hard to judge. Like, Bleak's house, right? I didn't realize until way late into playing that the bloody little dot on the left hand side, which they've removed in the Game Boy Advance version, you have to press like up and down to set the distance of when, like, to throw the actual
okay,
snowball.
yeah.
And so what I was, what, because to
Wait,
be
they
honest,
they
it's actually,
removed that in the Game Boy Advance, so you don't even
yeah,
know.
which I think, no, which I think makes sense because the problem is the game, it's actually poor design. And, the more I like get into game dev stuff, you can kind of see the problems and pitfalls
But
with
how
these
are you
things.
supposed to know which you basically that if anyone doesn't know, there's 2 lanes. There's like a front lane and a back lane, and it's you're throwing snowballs. How you
Yeah.
without do they change the sprite at all so you can tell which one you've currently targeted?
No, but there's only ever one. So you're only ever really targeting one, right?
No, you can swap. No, you swap between the 2 lanes at will.
Yeah, correct. But I'm saying as the character, you're only trying to attack the boss.
Yeah, but you
So,
you could be targeted the top row while the boss is on the bottom row.
yeah,
So
sure.
you
But
need to know which one you're currently targeting.
you're going like way in the weeds compared to like, it's confusing to people. Because what was happening to me was I was pressing up and hitting it, right? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I was pressing up and pressing the button to shoot, which was working sort of, but it felt very clunky. I was like, what's going on here? It's like sometimes I'm not throwing all the way up, right? And then you'd go down to the bottom lane and I'd press down and shoot it. And this is what I'm saying from a mechanic perspective is poor design because that sort of does work, but really what the game is doing is I'm pressing down and then it's switching to the down lane, but I've already thrown it up high
Yeah.
because it doesn't work simultaneously.
I'm not defending like that. I'm just trying to understand why removing the indicator to tell which one you're targeting makes it better. To me, that makes it worse.
Well, it would because what was happening for me is I was always missing him the first go if he'd switched lanes. Which also by the other way, you could say that what the game should have done is if I pressed down and attack at the same time, it should just automatically switch to the
Oh
down
yeah,
lane,
yeah, that makes
which it
sense.
didn't do. It didn't do. So I would like waste a hit, and often the first hit you need to get that one because it's before he starts throwing.
Yeah,
So I actually got so annoyed with that fight, and then I realized, oh, that stupid little small indicator, which is not even very prominent. Like, I need to like flip that before shooting. And I'm like, that's kind of
and
lame.
that's fair enough. That's my favorite boss fight in the game. So
Well, and I liked it after that point, but the other thing is he doesn't look like he belongs in the game. And it's my overarching thing with these bosses. Half of them feel like some third party put them together from
yeah,
like Killer Instinct or Claymation or
yeah, he
something
does
like
look like a
that.
clay
Clay
fighter
fighters.
because there is a snowman in Clay Fighter as well.
Yeah, he
So
looks really
yeah,
like it.
but
So I didn't like the design, but I like the boss fights more than
oh,
DKC2. But DKC2, all the bosses look like they belong in that
except the
world.
sword to me, the sword is weird,
Nah,
but
for me it does, but I can kind of see where you're coming
yeah.
from.
I think what they've done with the animal buddies, so there's less of them in number two, but I think it's a nice selection. So you've got the spider coming back, which is great. I'm glad they, obviously brought that back because it's the coolest one. But they introduced the elephant, Ellie, which I think is really cool mechanics. Sometimes a little awkward to use, and they don't really tell you as well. So Ellie can
Mm,
suck in objects and then spit them back out. So whether or not it's water, using the waterfall to get water, or if you're on a barrel on top of water, but also to suck in a barrel and shoot it into the water to create a platform. But what they don't really tell you is, like some of the other animal buddies, you can change the trajectory of what you're throwing. So there's times when you're like, "Wait, what do I do here?" But you got to hold up to throw the barrel so it goes more of an arc to land closer to you. Which once you
mm,
understand, it's fine, but the game doesn't really tell you. It just says hold L and press R. It doesn't kind of tell you, and there's no hint boxes in the game or anything, so I don't know how they would
yeah.
have shown it to you, but
Maybe it
it's
was in the manual.
possibly in the manual, yeah.
Mm.
But once you know that, it's fine. And so overall, I do like it. But honestly, my favorite animal buddy is the Parry the parallel bird that they added. So
Is it the one that doesn't shoot? Or
no, so this is the bird that you unlock, and it's a tiny bird that hovers above you.
oh yeah,
I
yeah,
just
yeah.
love this concept. So it's called Parry the Parallel Bird because it follows your movements and it's always a certain height. And what you've got to do is it's not helping you in technically, but what if you get past a certain area and you still got the bird with you, and then you get to the end, it will give you something, and that could be a bonus barrel. It could be the steel barrel that you need to get the DK coin and things, or it could just be a
Mm,
free life or something like that. But that's just such a
yeah.
cool concept that I don't think is like what other game has done that? Just where they add this little cool challenge that is optional that means that when you get past, you've got to also protect this thing that's hovering above you. I just love that idea.
I'm not sure if it's a good or a bad thing. I think overall the animal buddies felt a little bit weaker in this game. Maybe that's a good thing. They were probably almost a bit OP in DKC2.
The frog,
I felt
the
like if
frog was definitely like, okay, I can just jump super high and stuff.
yeah, yeah, and just like the rhino, there's just like a lot of the animal buddies. I felt like the parrot in that one almost always was able to shoot, whereas in this one, so a lot of times you couldn't shoot anything. So yeah, I felt like it's probably more well balanced, but I kind of like that having that overpowered animal buddy
Yeah.
sometimes because it just made it easier for me.
And just to
Um,
quickly try to just speed some of this up. So graphically, look, this game, other than some inconsistencies with the artwork, boss and stuff, like looks great. I think
yeah,
I do love the use of giant sprites as well. Some of the lighting effects, like in the dark underwater level when you light it up, looks great. I did have a problem though with the Nintendo Switch Online version, and I swear this did not happen, or at least this amount in the SNES version. I had so much slowdown in certain areas.
Yeah, I had that as well. I
That
was wondering. I was going to ask you
I
because I never played this
that
game.
did not have like to that extent in the SNES.
Interesting.
Like because to significant sprite slowdown, that's like what the hell is going on here?
It was chugging at some
Yeah.
points for me.
I do
Yeah.
love a lot of the stage settings, like the trees, the waterfalls, and the cliffs. You know, there's some areas that are a bit like, okay. I do like the factory and stuff. So yeah, graphically, it's very comparable, but Donkey Kong Country 2 did have a really cool, consistent theme. But as I said back in that when we talked about that, the middle
Mm.
part of that game feels a bit meh to me in the swamp and the fire areas, but everything else is fantastic. So it's kind of like they both got their ups and downs, I think.
Yeah, for me, like they look as good as one another.
Mm.
Like they look better than DKC one, but it's kind of a bit marginal to be perfectly blunt. DKC one was just so amazing in terms of
Yeah,
how
yeah.
it looked at the time, but for this, it was a lot brighter, a lot happier, a lot tonally sort of friendlier. Is kind of one way to put it. But I do like the darker tone of DKC two. It was kind of an interesting thing for a Nintendo game. And I think just stylistically, that whole game fits together a lot better
Yeah, yeah,
than
it
this
does.
game
Yeah.
does. Because this game, there are parts of it where I feel like, especially with the bosses, it just felt like took me out of the game a little bit, where it just didn't look like it belonged. It looked very just non-consistent from an art perspective. But again, like this game looks insane for when it came out. Like it kind of still, I don't know, maybe there's not things to say, but it kind of looks still better than any 64 game that came out.
Yeah. Um,
Like, which is a weird thing, right? But yeah, it's a kind of the pinnacle of 2D games
and
from an art perspective.
look, and the soundtrack is generally, I think, brilliant. All these games are brilliant soundtracks. It is not as good as the first two.
It's the weakest by far for me. By
I
far.
look, I wouldn't say by far overall, but when you talk about the
Mm,
standout tracks from the first two, like if you take those big standout tracks, then yes. But if you talk about as I guess the overall soundtrack, I wouldn't think it's by far, but there's no Sticker Brush Symphony. There's nothing at that level by any means. But the thing that most annoyed me is the bear music. So you go into these huts with the bears so often, and it always starts with this jangle like da-ding, 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 and it's just every time you hear it, and you only hear sometimes like the first 5-10 seconds, and it's
mm,
like, oh god, all right, back in this bear hut again to hear that bloody music. So it's easily the weakest, but there were some
yeah.
stuff like the Rockface Rumble track and Nuts and Bolts tracks are great. I'm also, I think, as I said, like I have a lot more nostalgia for
Mm.
that music because I played it so much back in the day. But there is nothing to the level of the standout tracks of the first two.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a bad soundtrack. It's a very, very good soundtrack. It just like, DKC 1 and 2 to me are like 10 out of 10 soundtracks. This is like a 9,
Yeah,
So it's not
yeah,
bad. It's just there's nothing exceptional with this game's soundtrack. Whereas legitimately DKC 1 and 2 had tracks on there where I just think they're just actually good. It's just good music, like parking video games and everything like
yeah.
that.
DKC2 also had a lot more great environmental usage in the soundtrack,
Mm,
where it had like crickets chirping in the swamp soundtrack and the cool, like when you're in the hull of the pirate ship and it's flooded with water, you'd hear it as if it sounds like you're underwater and things. So really, really neat. But with
mm,
this one, it's like it just really, really great tracks, but nothing like that.
yeah. And just overall thoughts on the series, like the trilogy. So we will cover the Wii and the Wii U games. We agreed on that ages ago, so we'll figure out a time that makes sense to do those games. But yeah, where do you rank this game amongst the trilogy on the SNES?
So just first of all, it's been great to replay these games.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Yeah.
I I did. It's definitely reaffirmed exactly what I thought back in the day, which is interesting.
Okay.
There's there's part of me that's like, okay, if I replay through this game, which I hadn't played probably in about 10 years, am I going to
Mm.
start seeing more flaws in it than I did as a kid? And I didn't. It's like this is not me just being like, oh, I told you so. No, I honestly think this is the best game in the series overall.
Mm,
I know not everyone's going to think that. It's not in every regard. We talked about soundtrack, DKC2, graphics is very comparable. It's kind of, you wouldn't say it's way better or anything like that, and the bosses and stuff. But I like playing this one the most. I feel like
mm.
I'm, moving through the levels really nice. I love just the flow of the game. I love the secrets and just there's so much to this game that I just love. And as I said with Donkey Kong Country 2, I love that game is amazing. It's just the middle part of that game always gets me down, and sometimes I remember I used to stop playing there half the time, not half the time, but
Mm.
like a lot of the time, and then don't get to see the great stuff that's at the end of number two. So whereas this just feels like it's such a weird game in a lot of ways because the 64 was already released, and
Well, and when you say that, it's funny because back in the day, things didn't globally release at the same time. So for us, this came out and was available in Australia, and the Nintendo 64 wasn't. So it probably hit Australia harder than, say, in North America, where the
hmm,
64 was already out and this game wasn't. So this game came out after the 64 was released in North America, but for us, it was the reverse. So in a weird way, I wonder. I'd love to be able to do like a mass survey and see if people in Australia regard this game higher than Americans. Because I think overall we pretty much have very similar opinions on games. Um, but yeah, because I do remember when this came out, it was like still kind of like at that threshold. Versus some games came out after the 64 well and truly was out, and they almost never really registered any attention or interest because of that, right? Which is pretty common.
hmm.
But just going back to like the three, because I'll give my thoughts in a second. But do you have it kind of ranked as DKC one, DKC two, DKC three, and the gaps in between those? Like, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
So definitely rank them, but I mean number two and three are very close.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this is just I know everything's opinion and everything's personal preference, but I think it is really personal preference when it comes to these. Like what do you kind of appreciate more? Do you appreciate like the music and the graphics and stuff, or do you appreciate more the like how it feels when you're playing through a level? And I know it's again all that stuff's very subjective, but it's and so I definitely number two and three is so close. But number one, I think I was about to say I appreciate. I enjoy that game more than you, definitely, but
Mm.
there's a much bigger gap between the first one and number two and three are very close.
Yeah, I mean, you have nostalgia for all the games, but I only really have nostalgia really for the second one. For me, it really affirms Donkey Kong Country. It did a lot. Like, it was an amazing game when it hit. Like the way it looked, it was crazy. But just as a game now, if you look back at it, I feel like it's almost like a 7 out of 10 or something as a pure game. Given what it did and everything, you'd have to bump it up. But I think it's just daylight between Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2 and 3.
Hmm.
And I think it's a bit harsh because, everyone asks, why is it Kiddy Kong and all that kind of stuff. And kind of basically because Shigeru Miyamoto didn't like Donkey Kong Country. He thought it was a bad game. And effectively, revoked the ability for Rare to use some of the characters, is the implication.
It's really interesting. What would have happened if it was Donkey Kong instead of Kiddy Kong? Because do you reckon?
Well, it should have been. It should have been.
But do you think that like the game would be much more appreciated because of that? Because as in,
To be
because
honest, I think it would have been a better
more
game.
people would have played it. But see, to
Yeah, and I
me, it
think it would have been
doesn't.
a better
But
game.
to me,
I
it
think it would have been a
doesn't
better game.
impact anything at all from a gameplay standpoint. So
No, I just think just because it's the character, I think it's cooler that it would be Donkey Kong.
okay,
And I think it's neat from a design perspective and, just, had the second one and then, rescuing Diddy for the third. But I get what you're saying. It doesn't change anything mechanically about the game. But yeah, it's interesting to think that because the game for Western audiences really well, even Japanese audiences, but yeah, Shigeru Miyamoto did not like that game. He really trashed that game when it came out. For me, yeah, I never really played DKC3 much. I played the opening part of it, which even you said wasn't the strongest part of the game. And I was a bit like, I know this when he loves this game, but I think he's just, nostalgic for it. Or, even at the time, I was like, I think it's just because you don't love DKC2 as much or whatever it was, just stupid reasons. But having now played it, like to me, it really comes close to being as good as DKC 2. But for me, as an overall package, and I'd like to think this is without nostalgia, I just think DKC 2 thematically is a stronger game than DKC 3. And just as an overall package is the superior game. But it is really close. And, you know, if it was like numeric, I'd say DKC 2 is a clear 10 for me. This is like a debatable 10. This is like a 9 or a 10, which is massive for me because I don't normally give games that. Whereas, yeah, like I said, Donkey Kong Country 1, I'd give that like a 7. And I actually think from my perspective, if you've never played any of these games, I actually recommend don't play Donkey Kong Country. Play Diddy's Conquest, DKC 2 and DKC 3, and then if you want more, go back and play DKC 1. Like I think that game is such that it might put people off the game altogether and not play through DKC 2, which would be a real
See,
shame.
I'd say what I'd do is I'd say play the first world of Donkey Kong Country 1 and then move on if you want, because the first world Donkey Kong Country 1 to me is really strong. And the music in that jungle setting is really, really cool. And just to see, you know, people would have seen probably video and stuff before of it, but would have been like, man, they did this on the SNES, you know, and then to see where they jumped with it, then leapt off and created these fantastic games, but off that essentially prototype, you know, in a lot of ways. So I think experiencing that first world would be great, because Donkey Kong Country, the biggest shortcomings of that game come later.
Yeah, I think, you know, you just stumbled upon a point in my mind that to me, Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 match the gameplay with the graphics. Like the graphics of number 1 is amazing, but I actually think the gameplay, level design, sound design of number 2 and 3 then match the graphics department. And you know, become, you know, that 10 out of 10 style games for the second and the third one. I really slept on the third one, which was kind of crazy because I loved the second one so much that I never really played through the third one. So I'm really glad that we've actually done this because I never played through it before.
I'd recommend doing the secret levels because I think some of those are really, really cool. Like I don't remember them all, but I've played through the first 2 of them. And I'm like, oh man, I remember this level now. This is really, really neat. And just like the main levels, there's completely new gimmicks that they haven't used in any other level in those secret areas. So it's really wild. So.
Yeah, it's a really cool series. If you have Nintendo Switch Online, you definitely should play these ones. As Swinny said, either play like through the first world of DKC 1 or just skip to DKC 2 and play through that. Like very, very cool games. If you like platformers, you have to play these games. They're just really, really cool games. All right, we've gone super, 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 super long.
Worth it.
We will come, we'll come back and play the Wii and Wii U games, and it'd be really interesting to see how they stack up because I haven't played much more beyond the first world of those games.
I can't see the face cams. Is Mike falling asleep or is he?
No, I'm still here. I went away. Rise. He was playing Monster Hunter Rise.
I was playing Monster Hunter Rise. God, I had no idea what the hell to even press. It's weird. But you guys have sold me on playing the.
Play Donkey Kong Country 2, man. Try that.
I was listening. I listened into the whole thing, by the way. So it's pretty cool. I got to try it out. Yeah. I'll try it out.
All right. I'm conscious that we've gone long, so just for
very long.
The outro. So again, if you ever want to reach out to us on Big Wig Pod on Twitter or through the YouTube comments. If you do want to see the podcast grow, make sure you give us a like, subscribe, ring the bell, 5 stars, follow on Spotify, whatever you want to do. And then just tell a friend about the podcast. With that, bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks.